Here I am with the Soul Care Journey event here in Joshua Tree at the Spiritual Retreat. I'm here with Miss Joan Borysenko, one of the smartest women I've ever met, author of 15 books and how many doctorates?
Well, I have one doctorate from Harvard Medical School, but 3 postdocs there.
3 postdocs? That's not an overachiever at all. But the one thing I want to talk about, I'm so happy that you're joining us here on the air, because I know you've got a lot of lecturing to do. Just your lectures have been fantastic.
Thanks,
up to this point. And I understand they're only going to get better. But what I really want to know is, I want to know what the combination is that you, because I've heard you talk about it, the combination of science, metaphysics, spirituality, and the universe in the human body. Tell me about that.
Well, you know, I've been fascinated with the whole connection between body and mind. I've been in this field since the late 1960s. So.
60s, wow.
Yes, I've been watching it develop and helping it develop. My original field was cancer cell research, and early on I discovered something very interesting in my laboratory, and that was I was growing cancer cells in tissue culture and adding different fatty acids. You know, there's a difference between like corn oil or coconut oil, olive oil, and all these things.
They're compounded differently.
Yes, they're chemically quite different. And I noticed that I could cause cancer cells to look and act normally, or cause them to become more virulent just by changing the fat in the cancer cells.
Does that mean they're not diseased when they?
Here's the thing. They're acting normally, but if you were to look at their genes, the genes themselves wouldn't have changed. But what we know now, what does change, is the tissue culture medium that they grow in affects the way that the DNA folds, and so it affects how it behaves. This is called epigenetics, or above the
So when you
genes.
saw this when the light went on?
Well, I was fascinated by it, and then, you know, over the years, what we realized is that you're a community of 70 trillion cells.
70 trillion
yes.
cells.
And you have
I
certain.
didn't know it was that popular.
They're living in tissue culture medium. They know your blood, your lymph. It's always flowing through. And we understand now that, for example, stress releases certain hormones from your brain into the tissue culture medium, as does joy, as does love, as all of those emotions, and those all generate epigenetic changes. Furthermore, here's like a really wild thing. If somebody is severely stressed and traumatized, the epigenetic changes in their cells can actually be inherited for 2 generations.
Wow.
So
I'm picking up with Grandpa.
You're picking up Grandpa and Grandma.
Wow.
And now we're beginning to understand. I mean, in 1967 it was news that the mind affected the body. Now what we know is your mind affects my body. That there's a whole new field called interpersonal neurobiology. Interpersonal neurobiology. And that's fascinating because if I go out there in the desert, I'm very different physiologically than I am in here, because I'm seeing different things, I'm smelling different things, I'm
not affected by the elements.
There's a breeze, and my body's responding to that through all of these informational molecules manufactured by the brain that come into the tissue culture medium of my body and make a difference. And so I'm a different Joan, depending on if I'm talking to you, if I'm meditating, if I'm resting, if I'm making love to my husband, if I'm playing with my dogs, if I'm being a scientist. And it's absolutely fascinating to understand how the constellation of positive emotions affects not only our body, but it affects the world in a beautiful way. When I think about your question on spirituality, for example, the definition of spirituality I like best was given by a Harvard psychiatrist, Dr. George Valiant, who says, you know, it's not a belief system, it's not a dogma. It is 8 positive emotions. It's love and compassion. It's joy. It's peace. It's gratitude. It's forgiveness. It's really being present, I think, to this entire gift of life. And when we're able to do things like heal the traumas of our past, recognize that so many of the stories that we tell ourselves and that are so stressful are just that, they're stories. And we could look instead at, for example, a bad marriage. And instead of saying, that low-down dirty dog, what he did to me, and rehearse our grievance story and make it a nasty environment for ourselves, we could focus instead on, well, I had the guts to leave this guy. He was a great teacher of courage. And in fact, I'm the heroine of my own story because I was able to get out of that place, really learn something. And now I'm in a whole new place. And that is a far better story to tell yourself than I'm the victim of something difficult.
It's only a mistake if you don't learn from it. It's simply a lesson. If you take it for what it is, learn from it and move on.
That's right. And we do. We have to learn from it, and then you have to let go of what was done and celebrate who you become.
We have to let go of what was done and celebrate who we become. Get out of the negative and into the positive.
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing. And of course, it's easier said than done because we have all these brain circuits that rehearse our negativity.
To rehearse our negativity, that's that radio station that keeps going on in our head, right? It keeps
going on, and the fact is, there's an axis in the neuroscience that neurons that fire together wire together. So
neurons that fire together wire together.
So you create new neural pathways, and that's why, for example, like Kurt was in a car crash. All of Kurt was once because my fear circuits were firing, I was badly injured, and these neurons wired together so that every time I got into a car I had to merge into
you had stress
and fear. And you can tell why this happens. This is a survival circuit that says, hey, you gotta watch out. But we know now that there are ways to calm down those survival circuits and wire new pathways. This is the new neuroscience of the last couple of decades, and it's super exciting. So there are 4 basic parts of the brain. There's your brainstem and spinal cord and all the parts of your nervous system that are embedded in every single organ of your body. And even the immune system itself, free-floating cells, communicate with the brain. Our whole body is like a brain, really. But that's one part of the brain. A second part are the emotional structures of the brain called the limbic system. Most people have heard of the amygdala, the fear center of your brain. Then outside of that, there's your cortex. All of the senses, the thinking, all that. And then the newest part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex.
Is that the newest?
That's the newest part. It's the last to evolve, the most recently evolved. And the middle of that, the orbitofrontal prefrontal cortex, has a very specific function, and that it modulates your inner world and your relationship to the amygdala. And so you can train your own brain to calm down, to let go of fear. And this is incredibly important.
Yeah, tell us.
Incredibly important because I can tell you we all want to do because if we had only appropriate fear, like we're in the desert. If there's a rattlesnake, I want my adrenaline to go and get out of there. But I make a lot of my own rattlesnakes.
Yeah, of course.
Internal ones. And what you can do is this. The prefrontal cortex secretes a neurotransmitter called GABA aminobutyric acid, that actually calms down the amygdala and stops it from firing. And so it brings you a sense of equanimity and peace. So when you start to notice, I'm all upset about something that happened in the past, it's not happening now. It's an old story. I don't need to do that. Well, it could be current. Yeah, the emotionally, somebody says something to you, or, you know, as a lecturer, I think, rats, I should have said this, and I said that.
Or that person out of the 300 people got
right,
walked out.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That
Yeah,
person
I know, I hate that person too.
No, I hate myself. That's the problem. But and those circuits take over on you. You can actually calm that. And for example, one of the things, this is the work of psychiatrist Dean Siegel, and there are Richard Davidson is a wonderful neuroscience researcher at the University of Madison in Wisconsin. They found that you can actually modulate the release of GABA, and there are several things that do that. One of them is exercise. So that may not work well in the actual moment. You're not going to be able to go for a run.
But keeping the endorphins going.
In general, exercise strengthens the connection between the orbitofrontal, orbitomedial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. The other thing that strengthens it is mindfulness meditation.
Mindfulness meditation, describe that.
Okay. The way to think of it is this, that normally you let your mind run around. I'm going to use a metaphor I learned now from Dan Siegel. Imagine this, that your awareness of everything is like a bicycle wheel, and on the rim of the wheel are all of the stimuli that come to your mind, like, oh, I'm a little hot right now because I'm at the window, or we're having this interview, and gosh, I wanted to take a nap before my next teaching, and you know, there was that person who walked out on me, and gosh, I wish that I'd done this or that, and there are these things at home, and all of those can drive you crazy. They're going around the rim of the wheel. However, there's a part of me that can just witness it, like, oh, here are all these thoughts. None of them are actually happening. They're just phenomena of mind. They're coming and going. If there's something important, I can write it down. But I don't have to let those dictate what is going on with me in the present. Just because I just realized a deadline and I'm thinking I have to go home and do it and my heart is pounding, that doesn't have to be my reality. By taking a few breaths, what we know is physiologically, if you breathe from your belly, slow deep breaths, it actually cuts down the fear. It puts you in the present moment. It allows you to be in the hub of that wheel and witness what's happening without it taking over your whole body-mind system. So to be mindful, I'm mindful, yeah, all this is going on in me, but I don't have to react to it. And that capacity to be mindful, to be present to all these different things, also helps me to be present to you, so that not only can I be wiser and more skillful with regards to my own mind, I can be more compassionate to myself and more empathetic. And that means when I'm talking to you, I can actually be present to you instead of thinking of something else. I can listen to you when you speak instead of thinking about what I'd like to say. That's right. And therefore, it develops compassion and empathy, which is what we need in this world. When I think of what spiritual maturity does, it has a lot to do with kindness, empathy, being able to control.
Spiritual maturity is one thing, but you have to get to the point where you're able to open yourself up to being spiritual, experiencing those 8 different modalities, right? But what's your process for uncovering, discovering, discarding all the stuff that's going on in our heads? With all your wisdom and expertise, what methodology or process do you use for that?
There are a lot of methodologies. I think generally everybody needs to learn this kind of basic control of the mind, and it ought to start in schools. There are a lot of schools now that have what they call contemplative education, where they're training their kids like this from the beginning. Get less bullying, more compassionate kids with the capacity to pay attention, to be in the present moment, to have that kind of, friendly demeanor, and really make other people feel welcome, which is a wonderful thing. And a lot of us were not trained that way, or we came from difficult backgrounds, or we came from parents who were well-meaning but had such difficult belief systems themselves that they scared the daylights out of us, or waiting for God to smite us or whatever. And at times, what we really have to do is we have to go back and look at some of those things and actually heal them. So there are many ways to do that. More than 20 years ago, came across something called the Hoffman Quadrinity process.
The Hoffman
Quadrinity process. It's a week-long process, and it addresses your mind, your body, your emotional self, and your spiritual self. And you really start to look at, well, what are the patterns that cause me difficulties in my life? Do I get angry at people? Do I take offense? Do I take things personally? All those things, so that you say, yeah, and it's really hurtful to me to take things personally. Or it ruins my relationship when somebody says something, I immediately get distrustful, and I want to shrink away from them because I feel so vulnerable. That's right, exactly. And they work with these patterns and trace them back to how you were raised, because essentially every kid wants one thing, and that is we want to be loved. Every adult wants the same thing. So we develop patterns so that our parents will like us, essentially. And then at other times we rebel later against them. But either one, trying to be like them or trying to rebel against them, we actually don't discover who we ourselves are and what our own hopes and dreams are. And so in a week-long time, they help you do that and develop compassion too for your parents, forgiveness for your parents, compassion and forgiveness for you. Yes, exactly. And so there are fortunately a lot of good technologies out there. And life is a journey it's a journey to compassion. It's a journey to how can we take our place in the greater family of life in a way that delights other people, serves other people, heals other people, and in the process delights, serves, and heals ourselves. That's the journey.
Her name is Joan Borysenko. She's the author of 15 books, and I heard her say on many different occasions, when I'm confronted with an issue, I write a book about it. You said that. I love it. Thank you. This is the Quick Fix. We're at the Soul Care Journey in Joshua Tree at the Spiritual Retreat Center. See you later. Bye-bye.